Welcome to episode 12 of the Hoop Threads podcast. I'm here with Merc Analytic. Joseph, how you doing, man?
Doing well, thank you, Aaron, for having me. Hope your day's going well too.
So the story of us meeting was pretty cool. We met down at the Minneapolis Final Four, the NABC conference. Grabbed a burger at the Blue Door restaurant, I think it was called.
Oof, yeah, Blue Door, best Bluesies in town, baby. It's for non-local listeners. It's a cheeseburger where the cheese on the inside. And so, I don't know. I mean, I'm a big fan. I gained a ton of weight when I lived by one. I don't know how you felt about it. I think you were on the wave at a point too.
I was very, very on board with the Lucy's. So let's, just talk to us about how you got to this point. Your playing career, high school matchups, and the beginnings of Merc Analytic.
Oh man, I mean that's a long explanation. Basically, the best way that I can really kind of like summarize my career is that like I am exactly the type of player that I always consult and tell teams not to play a lot of. I was an all offense, no defense, like 4 or 5. We thought it was a 3, and had aspirations of playing the 3. But
small ball ahead of your time.
Yeah, no, it's funny that Coach Tauer always tells me. Coach Jon Tauer, should probably introduce him before I mention him casually, but he always tells me I was ahead of my time, and I'm like, dude, there's no way you would have played me in any year, But yes, I started off. I really fell in love with basketball, like many people do at a young age. I grew up in a town of 1,800 people, first small town west of Minneapolis in Minnesota called Long Lake, home of NBA veteran Jon Tauer. So, basketball was always kind of like the cool thing at school. Even before it was like cool. As cool as it is nationally, and even in a hockey state, like I always felt like it was a really cool thing to be a part of. And then, as I worked at the game and started really honing my craft and getting better, and going from right hand, left hand layups, getting up and smacking the backboard, I really just fell in love with the game, and I wanted to really work at it. Unfortunately, my body had a lot of other issues and other ideas that they wanted to. Instead of really taking off and having a basketball career, my knee really wanted to have a lot of surgeries and a lot of rehab, and so. I was fortunate enough where I played at a really great basketball powerhouse, at the time in Minneapolis called Mill St. Margaret's. When I was there, we had just my graduating class alone, we had 6 guys getting D1 looks, and 4 of them ended up going. One of them was actually still playing in the G League right now, Sanjay Lumpkin. Just a whole bunch of basketball lifers always around. I was blessed where I was able to learn from Jim Peterson, who's Sanjay's stepfather. I was able to learn from Don Zierden. His son Isaiah played at Creighton. Don is a longtime NBA assistant, WNBA head coach. WNBA head coach, NBA assistant. So, I was really blessed that I got some great coaching in a situation where I otherwise wouldn't if I went to a different school or even just grew up in a different area. If I grew up in if I'd gone to DeMatha High School, I might have been a cut on the sophomore team. But I was able to stick around and work, and started getting some looks, started getting some offers. And this is actually a pretty nice segue into the high school matchups. But as far as the guys that I really think about playing against, there were 3 really stand on my mind. Tyus Jones, Rashad Vaughn, Reed Travis. Those 3 were 2 years younger than me, but 2 of them, Reed went to the rival high school, so always saw a lot of him and his brother. Rashad went to the conference rival, and then Tyus was just Tyus. And so every time you play Apple Valley or Howard Pulley team, one of the summer tournaments, you got up for that. The moment that really kind of changed my life is actually when I was 17 years old. Tyus Jones in a Foley game threw a pass in the middle of the court, and I went up and I swatted it. When I came down, just ACL tear, meniscus tear. Never really got back from that point. From that point onwards, I played another 3 years of basketball between 2 different D3 schools of Minnesota. I only appeared in 3 games though, so it was a tough period because you work so hard at a craft. Your identity is all about basketball. It's all about hoop. How do you introduce yourself at a party? I'm Joe Gill. I play basketball. And then all of a sudden you go from saying that to, I used to play basketball, or, I play basketball, but I haven't played in the last 3 years. And, you really start missing the game. And, one of the things I always tried to do during those times from when I was 17, 18, 19, 20, when I was on the bench or, watching practice, I try to learn about the game in different ways. I always believed I'd get back and I'd be able to play, and I wanted to be ready when that day came. So I started learning about analytics kind of casually at a younger age than most people, at least most players for sure. By the time that I was fully done with basketball, I knew that I wanted to stay in basketball, and I thought at that point I wanted to be a scout, and so I thought like one of the ways I could differentiate myself, because there's a lot of former college basketball players who turn into scouts, right? It's not a very differentiating factor, but I thought at the time that, and this was about 2014, 15, I thought at the time, a scout that had an analytical base of knowledge, and maybe not a focus, but could incorporate analytics into his scouts, would potentially be something that the marketplace rewarded. And so I started kind of, angling for that. And then just over time, I kind of realized, that my analytics were actually probably better than my eye test. And when I was able to supplement my eye test with data, it really took off. And so this all kind of culminated when I was 22 years old. This time I was going to the University of Minnesota. I was just watching I think it was a game in like either December or January. The Wolves were playing the Cavaliers, and I was watching the end of the game, and just like a light bulb went off, and I was like, wait, this doesn't seem. And so basically I on the spot, within about half hour, I came up with a theory that there might be a more optimal way of playing late game situations. One of the great things that basketball teaches you is the value of hard work. And so for the next 4 months, I literally dumped 800 hours, basically every single waking moment of my life that I wasn't in class. I dumped into finding 6 years worth of cumulative NBA data for the final 10 seconds of games. And then, for one instance, one of the things I need to calculate, I wasn't able to find a big enough sample size in just 6 years of every single regular season NBA game. The final 10 seconds, the full scope was within 3 points, final 10 seconds of the game, NBA regular season, and for 6 years. And for one of the aspects of the that I needed to, do my calculations, I need to go back to 11 years. And so, while other people were off, at practice and playing games, I was sitting, up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning with my fifth, cup of coffee of the day, just diving through Basketball Reference, trying to, find these very, almost invisible data points that I was trying to find, to make this all come together. And when it came together, after 800 hours, I was actually able to prove that my thesis was just barely correct for this very radical strategy. And then of course you go about trying to sell it, trying to get your foot in the door, with the team, be it, on a sale or an internship or even just a low level position. And, that went not stellar, for a number of reasons. You and I have talked about why it went not stellar in my experience.
Yeah.
There's really no reason to bring it up in this medium. And so, at about 23 years old, I was working as a barista in this town called Mankato in Minnesota. I was making, minimum wage, living in a really crappy part of my best friend. And I was kind of at the end of my rope with, chasing down these NBA leads and, and feeling like I was getting, a lot of the right things said to me, but not a lot of any actual face-to-face, time with the people who could really, make this project happen on the court. And so I basically decided at this point that I was either going to go back to school, get my degree and be a history teacher in high school, or I was going to just throw one last Hail Mary out into my basketball network and basically be like, hey, this is what I've been up to these last 2 years since I stopped playing basketball. This is what I've been doing. This is my project. This is the conversations I've been having. This is what these people said about it. The project was pretty cool, actually. Dean Oliver signed off on it. We hopped on a call. My partner and I hopped on a call with him, and he walked us through it. So as far as like having some actual backing, it really felt like that everybody was saying this was going to work, and we just couldn't get it into the end zone for whatever reason. And it's funny to think about now, but I think I sent out about like 150 texts, phone calls, and emails, and I heard one serious response back, and it was from my AAU coach when I was 16 years old, and he was like, I remember you as a player, you're very intelligent, you're very hardworking, like, let's see if there's some way that we can make analytics work with these two players that I'm a skills trainer. And at that time, one of them was a former lottery pick who was early in his NBA career. The other one was an up and coming, about to be drafted college player. And, one of them went not great. One of them went incredibly well. And ever since then, I just kind of, kept doing what works and expanding and trying to add to my process and, pick up more clientele. And I mean, the wheels haven't fallen off yet. So I don't see any reason to stop now, so that's as quickly and concisely as I can make it. That's probably, the best timeline that I can draw up for you.
Nah, I mean, you did pretty well there. 2 questions. So the first one is, when you were going to teams and you were trying to sell your data and put yourself out there, talk about where you need to draw the line for yourself as a businessman. Like, you can't give them all the information for free, but also you do have to entice them with, like, this is legitimate. Like,
yeah, and that's a great question, because at the time I did not draw that line. That was a massive mistake, and that's why I always tell young people, I don't care what your project is. I always tell people, like, don't share with anybody, including me. But if you want to share with me, I will look at it, and I will not steal it. I will not rip you off, but I can give you honest feedback. But I also recommend you don't show it to me, because I think we were even talking about, like, just the habits of like being an ethical, upstanding person in the basketball community, like paying people for work, even small stuff, like not trying to convince someone that, like, the opportunity of working with me is, completely, negates any amount of pay that you should receive for this task. Even if it's $10, pay somebody for a task, right? But yeah, that to me, like, that was, I look back at that, at that as definitely being an aspect of the mistake. And, within about 2 or 3 meetings with teams and conversations with teams, I realized, like, oh, this is totally the wrong way to do this. And then I started, like, leaning more into the endorsement and not the actual data itself. But, there are a few teams out there who have gotten my work for free, and that kind of irks me a little bit, but it was my own fault, so I can't be too mad, But yeah, on some hard drive somewhere, there's some old Joseph Gill files on a radical late game strategy.
I mean, experience is the best teacher, and kind of going off of that, what have you learned about optimizing your process and making it more efficient as far as organizing data, as far as, knowing where to lurk? I mean, I'm sure that you have access to Synergy now, and that obviously helps a lot, but
yeah,
talk about.
I mean, obviously, anybody who's familiar with my work knows that I lean more heavily into Synergy probably than almost any analytics guy that I know. There's almost a stigma in the analytics community about using Synergy, and I'm like, guys, like, how you're always complaining that no one listens to you because like, they don't understand what your like XPST stat even means, when what's a 14 versus a 24. Everyone knows what pick and roll is, and everyone can figure out what 1 point per possession is. It's 50% from 2, it's 33% from 3. Like Synergy's done the hard work for you on every level. You just have to analyze the data and then communicate it effectively. But I don't know. I mean, I got to get off this soapbox and get back to the question at hand. And it is actually really funny to think about, because, I mean, my first 2 clients, I didn't have Synergy access until the tail end that I was working with them. And so I was literally going through, and like I basically reverse engineered Synergy before I even really knew the full scope of what it was. I looked at spreadsheets, and it's one of those things, like, Synergy's so common sense in the information age that, like, it's not too crazy that, like, once you understand the basic concept, that you go through and you can make it yourself, and then of course you add to it and you figure out better data points to track, more variables to track. Like, I look back at some of my earliest work now, and it's almost impossible to answer, like, how did I become more efficient, because my process became 15 times more efficient. How did I find, better correlations, cleaner correlations, unknown correlations? It was experience. It was just, every single client, there was 1 or 2 new things that I would come up with the first 10. And then, for the past, like, I don't know, 3 years, every single 5 clients, I've come up with 1 or 2 new things, and I always try to incorporate that data. First, obviously, you got to check it to make sure that it's not just, you seeing things, it's an actual trend. But yeah, I mean, it's just constantly adding to the process, constantly trying to figure out another edge, trying to figure out another way to convey the information. I mean, truly speaking, I mean, that to me is where I think that I've grown the most, from when I think about the earliest conversations I had, where I had a lot of the similar data, so like 85% of the data that I have nowadays, and most of everyone knows the basic tenets of analytics, right? Like, don't take a lot of mid-ranges. No mid-ranges would be preferable for almost every single player. Shot to the rim, 3-pointers, corner threes, like that's
old school coaches, cover your ears.
Yeah, true. And then, it's literally just like, if you can stay on topic with those 5 things, and then just make common sense, like, basketball observations, like, hey, turnovers are bad. Like, you're a lot of the way there already. But like, where I've really grown, though, is in trying to communicate and trying to figure out, and that's where I think a lot of analytics fall short, is that, like, there's no bridge being built between the people who claim to know all this information and claim to have all these answers, and the people who could benefit the most from these answers. And frankly, like I've said this for years, it's not, maybe it's just my basketball playing background, where when I first, even as a mathematically inclined kid, when I first came into analytics and I first became aware of basketball analytics, my first reaction was, there's no way this could actually be, useful enough in a practical sense to help make decisions. I was already familiar with baseball analytics, because baseball is a very linear game. If you hit the ball in the left field, you're never going to see a guy call an audible and run to third before he runs to first, right? Like it's a very set way you go about scoring runs and creating runs, and it's literally the only way. If you were to run to second, third, first, then home, you wouldn't score a run.
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress. And so, I really feel like in the communicating aspect of it, having that experience of like being a player, being someone who was at first a skeptic, and then, not trying to be the most correct person I can always be, but trying to be the person who imparts the most useful information that is acted upon that can possibly be. And those are two different people. That has really been, I think, where, I've tried to grow, and I've put the most effort into, growing. That's where I've seen the best results. Got you.
So I listened to a podcast today. I don't remember which one it was specifically, but it was Mike Procopio that used to work with Impact Sports with Tim Grover, and obviously, Michael Jordan, Kobe, all the big-time clients they had. And he told a story about how he worked for Kobe. I think this was in the late 2000s, so kind of through that last, 2 championship run that they had. And he provided a scouting report and video for his next opponent. And I think he said it was kind of birthed just, he had seen a Mac article that I think it was the Houston Rockets, that I think it was actually Daryl Morey, where he said, we think we figured out how to guard Kobe. And Kobe was like, okay. So this guy.
That's a perfect segue into how not to communicate in the basketball analytics world. I mean, Daryl Morey could have been correct, but the moment you say that, the framing of it in Kobe's mind, Kobe's gonna stay up for 20 straight nights to try to figure out what you know about him and how to beat it.
The bulletin board material is just a nightmare for all coaches and organizations. But so I mean, he would prepare that scouting report and video for each opponent for the next 2-3 seasons, and Kobe thought it was really effective. Is that similar to what you do with your clients?
Yeah, so I've got different levels of clients. Like, I think almost any business. I mean, like, if McDonald's was a restaurant where they only had a hamburger on the menu, they probably would be very successful, right? But I've got varying levels of vested clients, and for the highest level, those guys do get scouting reports for every single game, and they're personalized explicitly to what they should be looking for based on how we feel about their game, how I feel about their opponents. And it's that to me is always the most probably fun aspect of what I do, to be honest with you, because that really feels like on a game by game basis I'm helping. And obviously, like, if when I'm working with a player, a skills trainer, an agency, I have to believe I'm helping in some way. But when you can actually see something happen on the court that you identified as a favorable opportunity that was likely to arise, and your client takes advantage of it, it's a really great feeling. It definitely gives me that feeling that I could be an NBA player for like half a second, and then remember that I could never be an NBA player because I played against NBA players and I was not an NBA player. And that's not obviously why I do it. But at the same time, like those are pretty nice moments. But yeah, I mean, that is very similar. As far as like on the fully vested client scale, that to me is a massive component. And it's nice for me to know. I mean, back then, obviously, and I believe Mike was a scout for the Celtics before he worked with Kobe and before he worked at Impact.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, how much Kobe was probably paying him was, on a flat rate basis or whatever deal they worked out. It was probably something that wouldn't make sense for the 12th, 13th, 14th, 11th, 10th guy in the end of most NBA benches. But what we're seeing in the NBA these days is that, first of all, people like me exist where it's something that can be sought out, and like I own 100% of myself, so like I've accepted pretty strangely tiered deals before. But I'm very flexible, and also I mean, like, the potential to go from bust to boom in the NBA has never been higher. Where if you're an end of the bench guy, like I'm literally looking right now at the last 10 clients, the batch that just came in most recently, and many of these guys are making $1 million, $2 million, less than $1 million dollars a year. And, if they're able to fix 2-3 things in their offensive profile, it's not unthinkable they go to making $10 million a year. Back in even, 2008, 2009, that wasn't the case, and maybe it wasn't worth the risk. Maybe it wasn't worth the time investment. But, with each passing year in the NBA, it's becoming, more and more in the player's best interest to try to be the Tyler Johnson, to try to be, I don't know why my brain goes to Marquise Daniels, but he's another very famous undrafted guy who really got cashed out. Try to be these guys who, are the Hassan Whiteside, where you're out of the NBA, you're playing overseas, and you come back and, you play well in a very rare skill set for a very short amount of time. Next thing you know, you're making a ton of money. That to me has been, the biggest, when I think about how the NBA has changed, as, from when I was a fan of it to now, and I'm working alongside it, that to me, it just blows me away every single day that, like talking to guys and being like, hey man, you're making $1 million right now, but in 2 years you could be signing a $50 million contract,
Yeah. Yeah, there was one tweet that you were talking about. I really want to label this folder. This could be us, but you playing for the next year. Did you actually go through with that? Or you left that in?
No, I mean, like I always come up like this is maybe just like the self-sabotaging part of me.
Yeah.
But when you're making these reports, you're sitting by yourself for long periods of time. You're listening to music, you're watching film, and just trying to take in everything. You're looking at numbers, and then eventually, like your mind just like it's like driving in your car for 3 hours. You're gonna start talking to yourself at some point, and so I come up with these really stupid things that are to write in. And then, I'm like, that's funny. And occasionally I'll share them on my Twitter because, I'm an idiot. No, editorials very rarely make the actual scouting reports because it just doesn't give about a very clean air of professionality, I feel like. So those normally get ripped right out.
Yeah. I mean, as long as they don't make it to press, Twitter's a different thing from that. Let's talk about the gap between conventional basketball knowledge, old school, old heads, kind of, so to speak, and the analytics community. Talk about how you bridge that intellectual space.
I mean, how much time do we have? Do you have anything planned next week on Monday? I mean, obviously I'm joking, but like seriously, like how much time do you have? Because like this could be a literal 3-hour roundtable, every single day for 5 days. I mean, like as concisely as I can put it, like I don't think there's a way that it, based on how the analytics side came into this space and how they acted as when they came into the space, I don't see a way that this couldn't have broken out like this. I mean, you're going back to the whenever you want to say that analytics would start coming into the forefront. I mean, Dean Oliver gets hired, I think, in 2000 by the Seattle Supersonics. So
who's that again? Dino?
Dean Oliver.
Okay.
Yeah, basketball on paper. He actually, I believe he was a GA at North Carolina. Pointing that flag behind you right now. Yeah, there it is. But yeah, so I mean, basketball was always kind of bubbling underneath the surface, and then when it came to the forefront, I mean, you go back and you look at, you read about some of these stories, and you hear people who were there talk about, their first interactions with an analytics guy, and it's just like you just want to put your head, in your hands and be like, dude, like, had that person ever met a guy before? There's stories of analytics guys interrupting practice to scream at the coach that their guys should be taking more corner threes in like 2002, 2003. There's stories of guys basically trying to like corral, decision-making processes like in the draft of free agency and being like, no, this is, and like, here's the thing, you can be technically 100% correct and also so bad at conveying your message, which is a line that I oftentimes skirt, I feel like, on Twitter, where I've definitely lost some people. But, I think what I've tried to always embrace is, like, I'm a former basketball guy. Like, more than anything, I can put myself in the shoes of a guy who's been around this game for 30 years, who's been investing his own time, his own sweat, his own tears, he's made sacrifices in his life or her life, obviously, been driving kids around AAU, worked his way up from, a grade school coach, and all of a sudden he's a college coach. And then you have some 24-year-old guy who can't make a layup telling him that he's an idiot. Like, I mean, how would any of us respond to that? And so it's one of those things where, like, the gap has become a chasm, and I really don't put a lot of the blame. And like so many people in analytics, I feel like, want to put the blame on the basketball people. It's like, hey man, the basketball people, first of all, they were here first. Second of all, they're far more invested than we were. Third of all, I mean, like, you better make a really compelling argument, and you better be very much on your P's and Q's and being able to like be available for questions, and being someone who like gives off an air of like trying to be someone who's trying to help in this space, not somebody who's trying to prove their intelligence or like demean in this space. Because like in my personal life, I've gone, into rooms that like most analyst guys would be like, it's suicide, where it's just like, these are the people who like, we're public. These are the people who tweet every single day, and have podcasts every single day talking about how much we suck. And I've made friends with a lot of those people, not because it was in my best interest to, but because I genuinely like those people. And when I play video games with those people. When I talk about BS in my life, about where to travel, and what books I'm reading, what TV shows I'm watching, I talk about with those people because they are basketball people. And, I can respect them on a level even when we disagree, because I understand they're not just pulling crap out of their butt. I understand that that they've seen stuff, and that they that it might not be a perfect correlation. It might not be something that holds up over the long term, but like they have a reason to believe why they believe it. And if we're able, instead of me just outright trying to bring the hammer down that opinion, maybe we just try to purse that opinion out a little bit. And maybe I also purse my opinion out a little bit. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, we are agreeing more than we're disagreeing. And we also can understand explicitly what the person is meaning when they say something. And they understand explicitly where I'm coming from with the math. And, it's really kind of like, don't get me wrong, there's other analytics guys who do this too. And like, there are former NBA guys who work in analytic capacities in the NBA now, like Brent Barry, Shane Battier. Those guys literally work in front offices now in analytical capacities. But generally speaking, I mean, like every single time I see somebody like on the timeline telling a guy who's been around basketball for 20 years or played in the NBA that they're just wrong and an idiot because of a spreadsheet, I just want to like, I want to call that person and be like, can you shut up for 2 seconds? Like can you take 15 more seconds to figure out a nicer way to say that? Yeah. And like a way to potentially like still get your point across that you think you're correct and they're wrong, but do it in a way that doesn't make everyone who sees the interaction just hate you. I know I'm something very hypocritical for how I sometimes act to journalists on Twitter, but frankly, whatever. I own 100% of my own company. I get to decide how I want to go about things. But I mean, I think basketball people have more of a stake in their basketball lives than journalists do. I don't think that's a crazy take.
Yeah, I think people just, I mean, part of that's the Minnesota nice. We all got to get along. But I mean, I think part of it is you can look at the numbers, and then I think the numbers guys have to point out where that's been effective in the NBA. So, right. You can talk as much corner threes, and if you're talking to a hoop head, you could say, look at Bruce Bowen and look at how the Spurs used him, and look at how effective and long that guy's career was. When NBA talent-wise, as far as skills, he wasn't, phenomenal. I mean, he found his role, he knew his role, and he excelled in that role. I think that's part of it. And it is true. You can't tell me how to play ball. If you can't make a left-handed layup, that's part of it too.
I mean, you can. You better be 100% confident in your process, and you better also be understanding that people are going to be judging you fairly or unfairly on the fact that you can't make a left-handed layup. And there are people that I respect in the analytics space who probably can't make left-handed layups. Yeah. There are people I respect in the space who can't make any layups, but do great work. But at the same time, they're oftentimes successful because they're able to bridge the gap in a way where a dude who maybe has better work is not able to. And I think also you kind of dance around the idea of actionability and practicality in analytics, where so many analytics are based around player valuations, where this player provided this much production, yada yada yada. I mean, that right there, I have never once, and I'm right now in development for a lecture series on analytics right now, and I am not going to at any point talk about how to make a spreadsheet to calculate a box score plus minus or a win share, because frankly that information, it was very useful 20 years ago when people could understand if Larry Hughes was more important than Marcus Camby, but in today's age, people have generally come around to the idea of efficiency. People have generally come around, at least in the macro. You can get bogged down in arguments about how efficient a certain shot can be, like a mid-range or a floater or a post-up or a corner three. But generally speaking, people have come around to this, and if you are if you think that you can get like value from this number that can be actionable, you can also explain it, as far as like the signals in the numbers, like, hey, players with high steal and block rates generally map out as overperforming their expectations on like their team impact. Like they generally bring more to the table than their basic statistical profile would otherwise suggest. And it also kind of comes to the fact, like, most people who dislike analytics don't know what analytics are, because like no one's ever actually like tried to explain it to them in a way that like was not entirely self-serving to the analytics person. Like you
don't get a mentality. Yeah, I feel
it's like no, whose fault is that, man? Like, if you were a first grade teacher, or if you were a college professor, or if you worked for NASA, it doesn't matter. At any level of education, if you're not able to impart knowledge into a person who can otherwise accept knowledge, it's on you. You are the problem, not the person who doesn't understand where you're coming from.
I feel that. Very passionate feelings on that. So let's talk about, you spoke on a pod about how it may actually be easier for you to work with a player who is in it for the money, as opposed to, someone that just loves the game, because then you don't need to overcome I need to add the Kobe fadeaway in this offseason. Can you talk about that?
So before we go further, I think what I said, and this is generally how I feel, is that like I'd rather work with a player who likes the game of basketball and is motivated by money than a player who loves the game of basketball and is motivated by basketball. Because if you got a person who doesn't like the game of basketball and is motivated by money, they're probably working at a 7-Eleven right now.
Yeah.
Like they're not my target clientele base, because those guys rarely pan out. Yeah. And when they do, congratulations. But you can still hire me, but it's just it's rare. But yeah, it's definitely I don't know how long I've been believing that, but it's definitely a trend that I found where like it's much easier for a player who's motivated by money. You just kind of show them like, hey, this is what the guys who make the money do. Here's the graph of the distributions of people who do X make Y. And here's the trend. And like they're generally able to accept like teaching points. I would assume also that this is the case with skill training as well, with coaching as well, because like they're in it to make the most money. And like their attachment to, like a shot that they hit when they were in the 5th grade that made, their dad, say you're the champ, and their teammates all mugged them because they won the game at the buzzer. Like, if you love basketball, it's going to be very hard for you to accept that a former D3 player like this is telling you to never take that shot ever again in a competitive game. For somebody who hit that shot and was like, all right, we're going to get some food. Like there's not a lot of baggage to drop off at the door there, and it's the thing, like, I don't fault players who it's harder for them to let go of habits that, like that the analytics say is costing them money, but that they really enjoy doing, because we're all incentivized by different things in life. And, it's definitely like, when I said that, and like, when I say it now, am I motivated by selfish reasons? Yeah, I am. I want to make the most money. But at the same time, like, if a player came to me and was like, hey, I understand this, I can't let it go. I could also be a human being who can accept that, like, just because I want to align, this person's incentives with my incentives doesn't mean that it's 100% possible. And to be the best at my job that I can be, sometimes you have to make concessions, and sometimes those concessions are pretty big. But it kind of comes back to the overall point of like, do I want to be the person who can produce the highest amount of change, or the person who's the most correct in theory? And that's definitely where, someone who's motivated more so by money than a love of the game is still going to show up to work every single day. They treat it like a job, like everything else. And, like, it's an easier road for that person to, once they see something that they can understand, that really connects with how they view the game and how they view their place in the world and their life in the world. It's just easier. And, I'm trying to dance around the point that I'm making, that's kind of selfish, because I don't want people to think that I'm like heartless, but it is just the truth in my experience.
Numbers don't lie. Got you on that. You're very private about your client list, and I feel like that's because, if a trainer trains an NBA guy, all of a sudden he changes his Twitter and Instagram profile to say I'm an NBA trainer.
Right. And then Drew Hamlin immediately questions them in there, and asks to see everything about the clientele list.
Talk about the importance of that privacy in today's world, especially because analytics is new, and because You know,
There's
that
a stigma. I think like we'd be doing ourselves a disfavor if we just ignore the fact there's still a stigma about analytics with probably 20 some. You know, like if you ask me the number, it's probably gonna be higher than the number that you say. But 20 some NBA teams, there's still a stigma around analytics, even the ones who are purportedly about numbers.
mhm.
And so, you know, that's, you know, not to kind of take the football away from you, but like that is in large part, I think, why, you know, honestly, it's not entirely my decision.
Mhm.
There are players I work with who are kind of like, I really appreciate you, and you know, like I respect you, and you know, like I thank you. I'm never going to acknowledge to anybody that they're like this is happening doesn't already know, and I get it. One of the things that you know, I never like point blank asked the question, obviously, like why, because it's not my place.
Yeah.
But I definitely feel like that there's still a feeling that, you know, if it was known that a player was using somebody like me, that there would be fallout with their coaching staff and their front office. And the coaching staff would probably view it as a bit of a selfish maneuver, which frankly it is. But at the same time, I mean, you know, when you really deconstruct, you know, why these entities exist, NBA teams exist to make money, college basketball teams exist to make money, coaches coach to continue being employed. Why is it the onus always on players then to be the ones who make, you know, the decisions that win games? Like why can't players, you know, have an eye towards that and understand that that's going to help them get paid? But why is the burden on players to play in a way, you know, that you know, that isn't always in their best interest? And it's also very interesting. This is something that was noted in Moneyball, where, you know, like you're kidding yourself if you think that the coaches aren't coaching for their own self-preservation.
Mhm.
You know, the manager of that team was very famously, you know, he was very anti-analytics. He said that he was managing the baseball team in the early half of the season, you know, in a way that preserved his ability to get another job. Why can't players do that? That being said, the players are the ones with the power in those decisions of who, you know, who plays how many minutes and what their role is, or who gets
Yeah.
paid how much. And so, you know, I think I think that's a large component of it. I also feel like players, you know, like there's definitely a stigma around analytics, where I think that, you know, like some amount of people would think less of a player. You know, like the fans would think a little bit less of a player. They would, you know, they would want to cheer a little bit less hard for a player who embraces analytics, because, you know, like the basketball purists love the idea of basketball being pure. And then, very selfishly, I don't really like fans, and frankly, I don't want to be blamed for when somebody, like, dude, on literally every single night in the basketball season, like you know, I'm vested in 3 to 4 losses. I don't want to have to be vested in 3 to 4 losses, and then also have to deal with, like, you know, a mouth breathing Knicks fan being like, "You're such a stupid idiot. Why would he take that shot there?" You know, and it's just like, I see how fans react to, like, my ambiguous praise of some of my clients. And I'm like, why would I ever share my clientele list? It's just, it doesn't really make sense on a number of levels. And so, you know, and it's also the one, and frankly, you know, we kind of answered on this I kind of answered on this in the beginning, but like the most important thing is that, like, you know, it's not my decision. Like, I can't speak for the player and how much and how they view me. You know, like if I think I'm doing great work for a player and a player thinks of me as a very ancillary piece in their operation, it's not, it wouldn't be, you know, the correct place for me to be on social media acting like I'm, you know, his right hand man.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I've generally found that, like, I attract a certain level of players who are very like me, very reserved, very quiet, like, you know, fun, like, you know, see that, like, mathematically inclined to a degree,
Mhm.
but, like, you know, I'm not blowing up everyone else's business, and the people who aren't blowing up their own business kind of gravitate towards me because of that, it feels like. And so, you know, I think it would also be seen as a betrayal, you know, to some of those players if, you know, like you know, they haven't outed, you know, this relationship, and then I out this relationship. It's just kind of like, you know, it's like what I'm doing is very trust centric, where you really have to have a high degree of trust in somebody like me, a former Division III player, to hand any amount of control over this machine that is your basketball career and your job. I mean, you know, I can't. I think I tell a story every single podcast I'm on, but the first time that I ever, like, worked for a player who went into an NBA game using my data, I was so excited and I was so confident. And then, like, 10 minutes before tip off, 5 minutes before tip off, I was like, man, I am going to throw up. I am literally going to throw up, because it kind of hits you where it's like, this isn't a video game. This isn't my life. This is somebody else's multi-million-dollar, like, you know, marginal play here, where
Yeah.
if you screwed up, they suffer, and you suffer a little bit, but they are the ones who really suffer.
Yeah.
And so it's gonna go back to it. I feel like that it would be a kind of a breach of trust, for players if I was going around and constantly being like, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I let them decide. That to me is, and I went, I think my first 3.5 years without ever naming anyone I worked with. And then finally I kind of got, like the casual go ahead. And then I mentioned like, yeah, dude, I worked with Alonzo Trier, I'm sure people figured it out years ago based on all the tweets I made about him, but like, it wasn't my place. So I waited.
That's fair. I think it's really disingenuous that they don't know things that are happening in a player situation, whether, they missed a shot, and that may be because, they just missed the shot and it was great defense, or, someone passed away in their family and they're going through some stuff, or the coach told them, to take that shot when they didn't want to. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. And so the whole fans preaching about loyalty thing, I mean, about now.
Yeah, the fans preaching about loyalty thing is just so absurd to me. I mean, like, fans go backwards to, protect the interests of a billionaire. But, when it comes to the 20-year-old kid who's, an undrafted rookie who goes 0 for 7 in a critical game, it's just the boos rain down in some of these cities. It's just like,
it's part of the game, unfortunately.
It is.
What makes Steph Curry successful, and what younger, lesser skills players should take away from his game? Because I try to tell kids all the time, he may, jelly from time to time. He may, cross over with the handles and stuff. There's some deep threes, but that stuff is all heavily practiced that he's done, his entire life now. You're different. Right. So talk about what they can take from his game and implement into their own.
I mean, what everybody should be remembering about Steph Curry is that, the highlight plays are unbelievable, and he's the greatest shooter who's lived so far. And like, he wouldn't be him without the on the dribble, like crazy move, step back, 26-footers. He also wouldn't be him if he wasn't the single most deadly unguarded catch and shoot guy in NBA history. And he wasn't also one of the most aggressive off-ball movers. And he wasn't also one of the most team-centric, selfless players you'll see. I mean, I always bring up, the statistical difference in basic statistics when it comes to rebounds and assists and even points between Steph Curry, who broke basketball, and Russell Westbrook, who, I mean, if anybody's familiar with me, they know my feelings about Westbrook's game, but has struggled to really get anywhere in the postseason without Durant. And, it's just one of the things about Curry that's so great to me is that whenever the moment that he thinks that there's an advantageous situation for his team, he doesn't even consider if he want to shoot or not, or if he's open. He gives the ball up every single time. And, it's also nice when you play someone like Draymond Green, who, is able to go out there and make, the short roll passes and the lobs and the decisions in 4-on-3 situations at a high level. But, I definitely gravitate towards, while I respect and I admire Draymond Green, I hold him in very high esteem, there's probably a lot more guys who could do what Draymond Green does than guys who could do what Steph Curry does. Every single year there's a new center. This year it was Aaron Baines, where Aaron Baines has been a role player his entire career. All of a sudden DeAndre Ayton goes down and Aaron Baines is shooting threes, throwing passes, doing fake handoffs, and everyone's like, who knew? And I'm like, I bet you who knew was Aaron Baines. I bet you Aaron Baines would go into every single coach he's ever had and is like, hey, I can throw good passes. And the coach is like, no, you set screens. It's that thing where like, and this is one of the things I've noticed when I work with bigs is that like, oftentimes almost every single big has one dynamite guard move, if you will. There's a guy I've worked with who, if you think about an archetype of a player who would not have this move, it's him. And he does. He has one of the most incredible fake handoffs I've seen on any player. But it's like pulling teeth sometimes. This guy could go 4 for 5 on him in a month, and the one miss is getting yanked out of the games, and the 4 makes it. There's no. So anyway, we're getting way off the beaten path. But what every kid can learn from Steph Curry is you need to be a threat when the ball's in your hands and when the ball's out of your hands. Because if you're not throwing the balls out of your hands, frankly, you are worthless in my opinion on offense, unless you are the best player on the team. And if you're the best player on the team probably has a big ceiling. And when I mean a big ceiling, I mean a very small ceiling. I mean, good luck making 500. I chose my word very poorly there. But if you are not either a catch and finish guy, a cutting guy, or a catch and shoot guy, what do? You are in the way. If you are somebody who the defense can relax on. And so Steph Curry is somebody who demands the defensive attention and has incredible gravity because he's worked so hard at these small, minute aspects of his game, like catch and shoot. Nobody gets as much attention coming off an off-ball screen as Steph Curry does. No one. I mean, he gets 2 or 3 defenders' eyes every single time. Oftentimes, 2 defenders are moving towards him before he's even caught the ball. And, if you're able to do that, it's not going to show up in the points column, but it'll show up in the win column and very quickly. I mean, 73-9, I don't care how it ended. 73-9 is incredible. It's a record for a reason.
Yeah, that leads us into the next philosophy that you have, which is basketball is a game of efficiency, mass is a game of volume. And I feel like Steph Curry, so many people doubted him for so long because – a lot of his points came from threes, and they're like, that's not sustainable. And he's been able to sustain that efficient percentage from beyond the arc while also, increasing the difficulty of those shots. So talk about that.
Oh, it's very interesting because basketball's game of volume has been glorified by pretty much every single statistic that basketball has, and this is one of the big secrets of basketball is that the basic statistics are garbage. They are very good for crafting a narrative of who played what role in a game, but as far as who brought an amount of value to a team in any given game, points are worthless unless you have possessions along with it. So you can kind of extrapolate possessions pretty effectively off turnovers and free throws. Turnovers and field goals, free throws also included. Rebounds, the most important part of a defensive rebound is that the defense caused the shot to be missed. In a game where I think 4 of every single 5 defensive rebound, for every single 5 defensive rebounds are uncontested. What's the value of an uncontested rebound? You preserve the slim chance of getting a transition opportunity. The ball just doesn't roll out of bounds. Somebody has to grab an uncontested rebound on the team, and if it happens to be Westbrook or it happens to be Rodman, it really doesn't matter. Contested rebounds are very valuable, but we don't have a differentiating factor. We do now with analytics, of course, but back then we didn't. Assists are basically, in my opinion, a player like Curry can get 6 assists and be the most impactful passer on the floor. A player like Westbrook can get 11 assists and be a guy who's dribbling the air out of the basketball. Steals at least will tell you, that a possession was ended with a 0 point per possession for their team. And a block can at least, you can kind of extrapolate, who's a dangerous, who's impeding, who's deterring shots at the rim, and who's also making it, difficult, if you take a shot at the rim, to be effective at the rim.
Real quick on that, do you put more weight on a big's, block rate as far as, blocking shots at the rim versus the defensive shooting percentage that he holds the shooter to?
It's definitely. It's a dance. Everything that I do as far as my team consulting is with an eye towards PPP. And so, I can tell you this, my favorite defender on a team I've ever worked with, I think he averaged 3 rebounds a game, half an assist, half a steal, half a block. He was statistically by, the box score plus minus by defensive win shares, he was a ghost. But he was also the best lockdown defender I think I've ever seen relative to the competition level, where you could literally put this guy, and he was a college player, you could put him on literally you put him on an All-American on their team, which he guarded consistently. He guarded All-Americans, he guarded all conference players. He always guarded the best 1 through 5. Literally the only player I've ever seen actually defend 1 through 5. The best, most efficient player, and he would turn them from skyrocketed efficiency to average efficiency, and if they were average efficiency, he turned them into detrimental efficiency. And so, yeah, I generally and defensive tracking statistics like defensive field goal percentage are obviously going to always be noisier than offensive ones because offense is proactive and defense is reactive. And you can kind of, and you can also self-select. You have more selection bias when it comes to, who you put a defender on versus what you ask an offensive person to do versus, considering who's defending them, if that makes sense. And so the variability of defensive numbers are crazy. They're messy, they're noisy. But, I am of the belief that, the best defenders, what they do will show up against the worst teams and the best teams in the defensive rating. And if I see a player who's only showing up against average teams in defensive rating, like line statistics, and not against good teams, it's probably indicative of a player who's a gambler, a player who's a little bit lazy, a player who's not about stops. And so, I have found that the guys who are truly the lockdown defenders who are able to impact PPP oftentimes are guys who are a bit of a ghost. Unless it's a guy who's like a point guard who's just a thief who's able to take everything away from opposing ball handlers, or the most deterrent shot blocking big man in the league. Generally speaking, a team's best defender does not have a whole lot of statistical noise, in my personal opinion. Other people will disagree with me based on the numbers they cite, but that's just me.
Got you. I just want to throw this real quick at you before we move on to philosophy. One line about the most efficient offensive team in NBA history, and one line about the most efficient defensive team in NBA history.
Most efficient offensive team in history, 2018-19 Warriors. I think in the 82-game season, their offensive rating, so points scored per 9 possessions, is still best. In theory, and this is just kind of a fun mental thought process because, obviously 4 surefire Hall of Famers on the team, right? If not 5, 6 if you count Steve Curry. It's crazy. But anyway, I sometimes I love the, to kind of explore the idea of would the Warriors be better if instead of Draymond Green at the 5, it was with their best lineup, it was Danilo Gallinari at the 5 of their best lineup? Because those two guys are 2 different archetypes of small ball 5 centers. And there's a bit of an overlap, because Danilo's a good secondary passer too. He's not a secondary passer to the level of Draymond. Yeah. He's also never been in Draymond Green position where he's always just passing out of 4-on-3 breaks. And then again, Danilo is not, Danilo's a better shooter than Draymond, but he's a worse defender. It's to me, that individual team broke basketball. Steve Kerr's philosophy with those players broke basketball in a way that the NBA has never seen. So I have to give it to them. Least efficient. Most efficient defense in NBA history. This is just kind of an inefficiency of the analytics market, but no one really pays us for. In theory, people love paying, for those. I'm paying you 50% for offense, 50% from defense, and then you get your workload, and it's oh, cool, 90-10. That was cool. That was what I was hoping for. I always try to get some amount of defensive, nuggets and some amount of consulting on defense, but yeah, generally it's the money is in offensive findings. That's where most of my hours go.
So you got nothing.
I was going to say whatever team is playing the Atlanta Hawks this year when Trae Young is off the floor, because their ORTG with him is 89 with them on the bench. So yikes. It's this 1950s level NBA basketball right there. But as far as a defense that I was man, that's there's always that that parody of the Southern man's oh, that's football right there, buddy. That fullback got 3 yards on 3rd and 4. That's football. There's always the basketball clue that was oh man, that's grit right there. That's grind, and they made him wait, but I don't know. I guess the easy answer would be the Pistons of Ben Wallace Pistons, but I honestly don't even know. I've never looked up who the most effective defense in history was. At least if I have, I've forgotten.
Interesting. I think it's between that 04 Pistons team, 96 Bulls, and there was some Spurs defensive teams that. The thing that I like about the Spurs that some people haven't really talked about is they wall up so well defensively. They don't send. I think in that, I forget what it was, where Spike Lee had Kobe do commentary about his season, the before the detail stuff doc, and he was talking about the Spurs. He's it's so dang hard to score on the Spurs because I never get to the line, and that's something that needs to be taught more at the youth level.
Oh, for sure.
So talk about your quote that basketball is a game of market, so efficiency.
I just breezed right past that question for a long. Sorry. Yeah, going back to basketball at a what baseball analytics did was they broke down baseball into its smallest unit, and the smallest unit in baseball is a run. Yeah. The smallest unit in basketball is a point. But the way that we never really properly conceptualize baseball versus basketball is in baseball, you have a 9-man lineup, and when you bat leadoff, you got to wait for 8 more guys to go to the plate before you come back up. In basketball, for that analogy, you can have your best hitter hit 50% of the time, 60%, even if you want to, 100% of the time. You can have him hit, if he wasn't on base in the basketball analogy, you can have him hit 100% of the time if you wanted to. And so it's definitely one of those things that gets lost where, when you look at point totals, it has to be weighted against an average of some sort, because once a player uses a possession, what happens directly after that player's possession is over? The other team gets it. And there's no team in any competitive basketball league that's ever scored at a 0 points per possession rate for an entire season. That team is going to be scoring at some rates. And so, what you bring as far as a volume is never going to be able to exist in a vacuum, because basketball is a turn-by-turn tug of war. And, if you bring me, 30 possessions at 0.9 efficiency in a league where the average efficiency is 1, you have, in theory, probably put us underwater. Maybe you are the best player, most efficient player on your team, and nobody else can be trusted to even bring in a 0.95 points per possession, average expected return, or a 1 point per possession average expected return. But, in that situation, a player who has 30 possessions and scores 0.9 points has 27 points in the game. Like most kids in AAU, a lot of pros even look at 27 points like, hey, man, 27 points. And it's like, yeah, but if you scored at 0.9 points per possession on 30 possessions, and your teammates scored on 1.2 points per possession on 60 possessions, you're probably, I almost said a bad word, you're probably a jerk. You are probably a selfish person. If you can't realize, and in theory, what most people argue is that the highest volume player is what, and this is a Dean Oliver concept, skill curves, where the less you're asked to do something at a per possession rate, the more effective you are at it. It's just a natural, kind of selection thing where, if you're shaving off, if you do something 5 times in a game and you have to shave it down to 4, with enough practice, you're going to generally just learn on your own which is the worst look. If you're motivated all by winning or your own performance, you're going to figure out enough things about where you score efficiently. You're going to learn which one to dump, right? Same goes if you had to add a possession. All of a sudden, the possession you're adding, it might be the first possession of the game, third possession of the game, your sixth possession of the game. It is going to be your least efficient possession because you're going to be doing something you wouldn't otherwise be doing, and you're probably less efficient at that thing, right? And so, in theory, that applies to the whole team where if a guy's soaking up a ton of possessions, it frees up everybody else to do what they do best. But I found in practicality that at a certain point, you get diminishing returns where, basketball is a social game. We're humans. We're not robots. To a certain point, you get that advantage. But then guys start feeling they're frozen out. Guys stop giving effort on defense. Guys stop cutting hard. Guys stop spotting up hard. They stop relocating hard. They stop setting good screens. All of a sudden, all the small things that go about actually – building an offense fall into ruin. And what's left is a very sloppy, very unappealing game of basketball with poor offense. And so, I found that in that situation where a guy is scoring, 0.9 on large possessions, the rest of the team's scoring well above them. If you take that player out of the equation, there's going to be an acclimation period. But generally speaking, those 4 players are probably better off without that one who's soaking up a whole bunch of those possessions. There's some happy medium where those players are still freed up to do what they're good at, and then a more efficient player is able to slide into a less higher volume role. Gotcha. So, yeah, I hope that maybe we'll take a third try on it because I think I got it that time.
I got it. Let's talk about the Josh Smith bar because that's one of my favorite Joseph Gill philosophies.
I think if there's any person who can actually claim that I'm just mean to them in NBA history, it's Josh Smith. I really went out of my way to be a jerk about this. The Josh Smith bar is my philosophy of if you are scoring at the rate of a Josh Smith three-pointer in any aspect of your game, you need to stop doing that thing immediately. It's relative, there's obviously, so the Josh Smith bar is 0.9 points per possession. How you get that is Josh Smith I think he was a 28.6% shooter for his career from 3. Yeah. I round up to 30 because I'm nice. See, Josh, if you're listening, I'm nice. I round up to 30 because it's a number that is easier to remember, and it's also a number that is easier to calculate off the top of your head, where 0.9 points per possession comes out nicely. It's 45% from 2. It's 30% from 3. So if you're shooting below 45% from 2, you are effectively shooting a Josh Smith three-pointer. Josh Smith lit hundreds of dollars on fire in his NBA career because he couldn't stop doing this. He bombed out of the league. Everyone said he was just the most ridiculous person because he couldn't stop chucking three-pointers. It was like the biggest talking point in basketball not the biggest, but it was a constant talking point in basketball every time Josh Smith was playing, that Josh Smith cannot stop taking three-pointers. What is so different from a Josh Smith 30% three-pointer with 12 seconds on the shot clock versus a 45% mid-range shot with 12 seconds on the shot clock? In theory, you're making a gain a larger amount of time, but that's offset over the long run perfectly by the fact that gain is 33% less than the gain of a 3-pointer. You know, so like that's the thing about PvP. Like, you know, and then there's I got this spreadsheet that I actually allow people to play with sometimes, where it's basically just like they get to, for themselves, you know, over you know, whatever you want to say mid-range shot is, whatever you want to say a 3-point shot is, when it's equal, they get to see for themselves exactly how often over X percentage you score 6 points, 4 points, 2 points on the mid-range versus 3, 6, 9. I mean, you know, you're not taking into account fouls, obviously, but it generally brings a point home that, you know, like even a small efficiency edge, you know, if it's a 33% 3-pointer versus a 45% 3-pointer, in almost every single game situation, except for like the most blaringly obvious one, which is like 20 seconds to go in a 2-point or in a 1-point game, the 3-pointer comes out ahead in both the single use, like the single, like the single instances in the long run.
Got you.
Yeah.
Talk about how you said efficiency off the shot clock.
I mean, the entire, like, and you probably noticed this already, is that like I love talking about other sports. Is there something you can learn from other sports? Do you know why? So in cricket, if you wanted to think about batting average, which is basically like, you know, times that you hit the ball and you score a run versus times you make an out. Do you know what most cricket players the average is?
Definitely not.
Well, north of 95%.
Okay.
And the reason why that is because in baseball, if you hit the ball, there's an impetus. You have to run to first, and if you don't run to first and the ball gets there before you do, you're out. Yeah. In cricket, there's no impetus. If the ball is not caught, you don't have to run. And so if you think about it, if you're a cricket player and you have an 80% chance of scoring a run versus 20% chance of making it out, you would be daffy to take that risk, right? In basketball, if you had an 80% chance of making a pass that leads to a wide open dunk or a turnover, you know, you take 80% chance to lead to a wide open dunk versus 20% chance of it turning into a turnover. You take that risk every single time, and then you hoist the Larry O'Brien trophy at the end of the year and you say, I'm the greatest, because you would be the greatest offense in the history of basketball. But in cricket, I mean, because there's no impetus, there's no reason to act in a way that, you know, isn't a sure thing. When the shot clock, it's not such a binary impetus as having to run to first, otherwise you're out, but it is it's like a guillotine, you know? At a certain point, it's going to hit 0 if you don't do anything, and you score 0 points per possession. You cannot score when the shot clock hits 0 unless the ball's already been released before it hits 0. And so, you know, like it's just a basic, simple diminishing returns thing where your expected value of possession at 24 is always going to be higher than your expected value of possession at 1. And so it would track that in the middle, you know, there's a certain curve, because when you hit 23 seconds, all of a sudden, you know, the 0.1% of the time you actually shoot 24 seconds on the shot clock is removed, and there is now an incrementally greater chance that your possession gets to 1 to 2 to 3, right? You went on to 14, all of a sudden that percentage of you getting to 1 continues to grow. And so all of a sudden, I mean, a shot that's a bad shot, that's an awful shot at 20 seconds on the shot clock is a downright pretty okay outcome considering the situation when we've driven ourselves into at 3 seconds, right? And so I always try to impart that to my players, where it's like, dude, if you want to take mid-range shots, first of all, I wish you wouldn't. Please don't seek out this. Don't be the hero. Don't be the guy, unless you're a max contract guy. Don't be the dude running towards the ball from the left corner up to the right wing with 4 seconds. I'm being like ball with 1 second on the shot clock. That dude got himself into that situation by over dribbling. It's fine. It's his fault. If he had someone like me that he hired, he wouldn't do that anymore. He doesn't. It's just the way of the world, all right? We can't save everybody, all right? It's like the trolley problem. We can't save everybody. But, you know, if you want to take mid-ranges, just wait till you, like, a certain amount of time you're going to have the ball at the end of the shot clock. Then take them. I don't care. Just don't turn it over, man. If you're catching the ball 3 seconds on the shot clock, do whatever it takes to make some amount of space and fire up the Kobe shot. Just don't fire up the Kobe shots at 14 seconds, man. You're letting both of our money on fire. And your agents, who might have been the one person who brought me in. He's not going to be thrilled either.
I like it. Let's talk about the story that you told on a podcast about what killed him was the laughing. Go ahead and tell that one.
Do you want to set it up, or do you want me to set it?
So from what I remember, there was a player that was shooting, and he was shooting 3-point shots at a low percentage in games, and you were like,
so you remember how we talked about Josh Smith like 3 minutes ago? Do you remember what he shot?
30%.
If I rounded up from 30, he shot 28.
28
and change. This player in 4 years in college, at the time of this story, I believe was shooting 22% from three. And he was taking about one per game because he was a position where you had to take roughly one per game based on the offense. By the way, this offense was incredible. This was just like the one loosest wheel in the entire offense. And this player was interesting because this player was a very intelligent player. He was very hardworking, and he was very team centric in the sense where like he would almost you get in a conversation with this player, and I'd be like, dude, like I wish you would have taken that three with 5 seconds on the shot clock. And he's like, yeah, but it's not. And I'm like, yeah, but you also like the marginal amount that we gained by you passing that shot up when it was wide open is probably offset by the fact that now in every single possession following that, you've just basically waved a gigantic red flag to the opposing team being like, I will never shoot a three-pointer. So he would even push back sometimes on the one attempt per game he would take. What was interesting about this player is over this 4-year sample size, he was one of the worst shooters I've ever seen. In practice, he was a pretty good shooter. And his shot wasn't like I do a little bit of skill work. I'm not like Phil Beckner or like Packy Turner where I'm doing, skill work with guys that are, like coming to me and being like, fix me, But like I can occasionally add something to a player's arsenal that they might not have thought of. This player's form was not great, not awful. It was repeatable enough where I felt like he should be much better than 22%. It was also, kind of just structurally unsound to the point where like he was never going to be probably a 40% shooter.
Okay.
What was interesting was in practice, when in certain looks from certain points of the floor, he would actually knock down shots at a very high rate. And don't get me wrong, what you do in practice does not matter for what you do in games. But what you do in practice should also be a little bit related to what you're doing in games. And, like oftentimes for a player like this where he's taking one shot a game, I think it's more, it's fine for you to pump up his confidence. I'm like, dude, you shoot 60% in practice versus a player who shoots 60% in practice and then turns around and takes 4 threes a game at 30%. You got to pump the brakes on person. Be like, dude, figure out why you're shooting 30% in games versus 6% in practice. And then we'll start you off at 1 or 2 attempts a game. Yeah. And if you do well, then we'll get you back in the role you want to be in. But anyway, this player, so, like everything else in life, it was this weird proposition of there's only a finite amount of time in the season. There's only a finite amount of time remaining in this player's career. There's only a finite amount of time that I can be around this team. There's only a finite amount of time for this person, if they're going to make a change to their game, to acclimate to it. And so I noticed when I was on site, which is not every single day as a consultant, obviously, I noticed just watching on my own, this player consistently shot very well in drills. And it became kind of not an obsession, but it definitely became something that I immediately was like trying to figure out. I couldn't. And, so the first 3 days I noticed, it was like, well, that's weird. He was shooting the crap out of the ball today. The 5th time out of 5 I noticed it was like, okay, this is very strange. The 7th and 8th time in a row where he's just a machine gun in practice and he can't find the rim in games, I'm like, there's something going on here. This is officially now gone from highly implausible. This is just me showing up on hot days, and that this is just a crazy run. Yeah. And so I started talking. This player had had conversations before, but we for the first time had a direct conversation about shooting, and the sense that I got was that he thought he was a better shooter than he was in games, but he just didn't feel comfortable taking the shot, and I couldn't figure it out, and so. Finally a day comes where I'm there, and then I start talking to this player. I start telling the coaches, I'm like, this, look at him, like watch him right now. He's true to form, he's knocking him down. And I was like, what I'm going to do is when we pull all the team together, I am going to literally point this out in front of 30 people. This player shot incredibly well. We're just going to see what happens. So the team gets brought in, and I do it. I call player up by name. I have him step forward out of the huddle, and I say, this guy, every time I have been at practice, been knocking him down. I know you're not, I know your percentages are. We don't have to mention it here, but I would like to see you take more threes a day and just feel like you have a green light. The coach obviously signed off on it. It was fine. The very first play of 5-on-5 after that meeting, this player is wide open in one of his favorite spots on the floor. His feet are set. He gets the ball kicked out to him. He shoots the ball more confident than I think I've ever seen this player shoot in his entire career. I've watched literally every single three-pointer he's ever taken in his college career. And he doesn't brick it, but he misses. It's not a bad miss. It's one that rattles around and goes out.
Mhm.
And immediately, four assistant coaches / managers / GAs start laughing. And one of them loudly says, "There's your guy, Joe." And this player, as he runs back on defense, looks over at me like, "Why would you do this to me?" And in that moment, it was like, oh, I think I get it. And so I literally go up to this player, and keep in mind, I mean, this is my job. This is probably not smart, what I did here, but I thought it was going to pay off, and it ended up paying off, so I did it. I literally cornered this player leaving practice who probably doesn't want to talk to me today anymore. And I basically tell him, I'm like, dude, here's what I'm going to tell you, okay? You need to shoot more threes. And these are the spots that I've identified where you're good. Set feet, corner shots. Set feet, corner. You don't shoot any threes when you're curling around. You don't shoot any threes where you're off balance. You don't shoot any threes unless there's 5 or less seconds on the shot clock outside of set feet in the corner. If you're set feet top of the key, there's 5 seconds, let it fire. If there's 7, pass it. And he's like, no. I'm like, no. Dude, you have to. Because this team right now is a ceiling where the best, when we're in the tournament this year, and this team did go to the tournament, the best defenses are just they're not going to guard you, man. Like this works against our competition right now. This is not going to fly in a single elimination game where all the stops are pulled out.
Yep.
And basically, we argue for the next 10 minutes. This person's like, I'm not going to do it. I'm like, no, you're going to do it. I'm a dick move on my part. I'm like, no, you should do this. Yeah. And eventually I'm like, okay, here's what I'm going to tell you. All right. You get heat when you miss. All right. You go to if you get heat, if you take 4 threes in the game and you miss all 4 and you get called into the office of the head coach and he asks, what the heck were you thinking? You say, Joseph Gill told me to do it. And I'm basically being like, dude, I told him, like, no, throw me into the bus. Like, literally tell them that I cornered you after practice and that I'm like, you need to do this. You have to do this. And he's kind of like, what? I'm like, no, dude, you are a good shooter. Like, in this specific role, you are good in this one thing, and you need to take threes for us to win games. And eventually this player is just like, whatever, fine. He comes out the next game, second possession of the game, the exact situation that I'm calling for. I believe it was a right corner shot, catches the ball with like 18 seconds on the shot clock. He takes it, and you can literally see, he shoots it confidently. You can literally see one of the coaches on the bench go, he's getting his hands up. Like, this is what is going on here. Knocks it down. This player, on not a very strong, I mean, not a very large sample, but on a sample of about 1.5 to 2 shots for the rest of the year, it ended up being, I think, about 15 to 20 shots. I think he shot 57% from 3 to finish the year. He went from being a guy who was shooting literally 22% on about 100 attempts for his career to shooting 57. And, yeah, that's a good run. The statistical significance of that, if you are truly a 22% shooter, making even, 5 out of 10 under those circumstances is astronomically unlikely. It happens some of the time, but and that becomes even more astronomically unlikely if you go 10 for 14. 10 for 14. I think it speaks to one of those things where, like, it's not always a technical issue with players. Sometimes you have to be willing to, bridge this gap that, like, what motivates a player, even some player like this player who was very team oriented, incredibly intelligent, who was very, very about the team. Sometimes there are hidden incentives where a player just doesn't want to feel like, him shooting threes was a joke, and I don't know how often like like that smirking and that behavior was going on, but, like, if you're a coach, I think that some coaches lose track of the fact that, like, when sometimes something funny happens in a practice and everyone kind of chuckles, that can be a very traumatic experience for players, even college players. I mean, I wouldn't say, like, I don't want to be saying, like, even pros, but I'm assuming it does happen to pros too on some level. I mean, I've heard stories that not happen with any of my clients, but I've heard stories of guys who are incredibly talented bombing out of the NBA because, like, their teammates were crappy to them. They're just very crappy to them.
A lot of Jordan teammates, probably.
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things where, like, when something funny happens on the court, like a dude airballs a 3 who's not a shooter, you don't know what that person's been doing in his driveway, or like, obviously if a dude isn't putting in the work and isn't getting better and there's no signal that he's getting better and he airballs a 3, be like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, why'd you take that? Seriously, why'd you, you can tell me if you've been working on that, and then we're going to ask, how much have you been working on it? This is kind of the Coach Tauer influence, where it's just like, brutal honesty is the best policy, where it's like, hey man, I think that's a bad shot. Why do you think that's a good shot? Because every once in a while, you're going to be told by a kid, like, I've been working on that shot, for the last month and a half for 30 minutes every single day at home. And it's like, fine, take some more. We'll see what happens. Because, if you don't give a leash to a player to show you a skill set that they've never shown before, there's no way that player can improve except in the most gradually, acceptable amounts that the coach is allowing them to improve by.
It has to be proven in practice before it goes into game, correct?
Completely agree. But also, there's no way to prove it in practice if a player isn't allowed to take any amount of a risk at any point in his practice career. And that, to me, you have to find a balance. Practice can't be just experiment time for every single player to go out and just be like, this is what I want to be. It's like, no, this is who you are. But also, you do need to allow some amount of leeway for a player to surprise you because, it kind of goes back to Steph Curry where, one of my favorite graphs for when Steph Curry was first going on this run, the 67-game season there was this graph that proved in theory that Steph Curry was just on an incredible heater because no one had ever shot this effectively on off-the-dribble three-pointers in NBA history. I mean, that graph was, of course, proven to be 100% wrong because Steph Curry found out a way to practice it in a way no one else had, practice it in a way, and the system unleashed it in a way no one else had. And, at a certain point, you do have to accept that a sample size, if it's large enough, is beating a trend. And Steph Curry has crushed a trend. And now all of a sudden he's proven this is possible. It's – in theory, everything's impossible until it's done for the first time, right?
Yep. Let's do some quick hitters. So, talk about an NBA player who's called overplayed that isn't.
Ben Simmons to me is just like, the most underrated, underappreciated player in the NBA. And I know you said this is a quick hitter, and I'm sure that that this might turn to a long hitter. But I mean, what do you expect? He's a 6'10" athletic ball handler who runs an incredible pick and roll. He's playing with statistically one of the worst rollers in the NBA in Joel Embiid. And on top of that, Joel Embiid doesn't space the floor and demands a ton of post-up touches a game and is in terrible shape. I mean, what do you expect? If I were to plop, if I were to plop Glenn Big Baby Davis, in the middle of Giannis's Bucks, how do you think that would affect Giannis's ability to score effectively over a 30%, over a 30-minute sample size they played again? I mean, if Nikola Pekovic was on the Bucks, how would Giannis do? I know there are a lot of people who are very angry at me right now hearing this is my actual opinion.
Yeah.
But there's one trend that you should note in college basketball and professional basketball. This is coming from a former back-to-the-basket guy. I posted up a ton. Like I said, I would never recruit me because I didn't play defense and I clogged the lane all the time. Yeah. If I recruited me, it would be in a stretch, I would just take threes and make passes. I would not, and any critical defensive possession, I would be glued to the bench. Yeah. But yeah, it's just he's so. I mean, yeah, it's like I don't see any logical path to success. The fact that Ben Simmons is able to impact games the level that he does consistently, and he has a few stinkers occasionally, obviously, but every single time that Embiid doesn't play and there's some modicum of shooting around Simmons, the team has performed much better than you'd expect from a team that is losing out on a max contract slot. That's another part of this variable. If you were to move Embiid, all of a sudden you have like $45 million more every single year with the cap to play with, So yeah, Ben Simmons. Until Ben Simmons isn't an athletic freak, I'm going to be on this train.
Numbers wise, you're one of the guys that buys these 10-second clips of him making 4 in a row that the 76ers release every time.
I don't even buy that. I don't care. I really don't. Don't get me wrong. If he was able to make 3-pointers, he'd be better.
Yeah.
He's still, in my opinion, really probably very good even without making 3-pointers. It's like I would love to hear an explanation of somebody who thinks that Simmons isn't a Giannis style player. Try to describe to me in the most precise terms you can what is the difference between those two guys. Giannis is a little bit longer. ... I literally struggle. And you can say Simmons' handle is looser or what?
Available more often.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Simmons isn't allowed to travel as much, and I love Giannis, but Giannis does get away with a lot of travels.
No, I was saying more. He just had less injury issues, but Simmons can't control that. But for me, it was just seeing the roster, development around Simmons has issues, and they brought in Horford and they brought in Tobias, and I was like, you already have 2 7-footers that you're struggling with the spacing stuff.
Right. I was very out on Horford before this free agency even started. And then I signed with the 76ers, and I was like, well, this is just never going to work. Like,
Now I'm really out.
it literally reminded me of that SpongeBob episode where SpongeBob's like, this bubble can't get any worse. And Patrick's like, what about 2 bubbles? And then he just, it's literally.
Bringing it home with the SpongeBob. I love it.
And people are like, Al Horford was brought in to facilitate Simmons, and like, what? No, like the explicit stated reason by team officials was that he was Embiid protection. They were doubling down on Embiid. He was supposed to be the guy who was like the gap when Embiid went off the floor, they could keep playing with Embiid light.
Yeah.
Like, of course it doesn't work. What did the Warriors teach us? Shooting's the most important thing on offense. There's no shooting on that team, And I'm going to dump the guy who's a post-up guy versus the guy who's the athletic ball-handling freak,
Losing JJ was big. Talk about the NBA Twitter community and the relationships you formed through that medium.
Oh, I mean, I've made some, it's that weird thing where like some of your online friends, when you think about it, are like, I like talking to that person. Like, oh, I've met them 4 times. Like it's very weird to talk about in the sense, but like, I talk daily, for long periods of time with some of the people that I was talking about earlier, were like, they're basketball people who don't even really like analytics guys, but like we get along fantastic. So, like, I think about like the friendships I've made with skills trainers and like the business relationships I've also then made with skills trainers, friendships I made with the guys who were part of Elite, like M-Grads and I, like, it's him and I have been like, I have been so happy that I get to like just kick it with that dude in the internet space, like, once a week, every single week for the past 3 or 4 years. Like, he's a constant source of hilarity. He's a constant source of like funniness. He's also
what is his story? I love his account. I just don't know him personally.
Guys in basketball. I mean, honestly, it makes me laugh when people are like, he's xenophobic or like he's anti-analytics. I'm like, dude, I've literally sat next to M-Grads at Summer League and be like, hey, here's your buddy's synergy page. And he's like, yeah, I get it. Like, he gets analytics. He just doesn't like your analytics. Like, stop. That's another trend of the people that I like, that are like non-analytics people. It's like, no, they like information that's going to help them be better at their basketball opinions and their basketball careers, coaching. But like they just don't like they don't. You haven't won them over to your style of thinking. Like, he's a smart guy who's in the basketball space, and like he's fun to hang out with. He's funny and he's smart. So he's my type of guy.
What's an NBA take that you wish you could take back?
I mean, like, right now, anybody who's followed me, I mean, like, if you follow me and you're listening or watching this, I'm sure there's a take that just jumped immediately to mind. Like, dude, I've had some really bad whiffs. Like, what really led me down this analytics train, where like I realized my scouting wasn't as good as my analytics, is that like Kristaps Porzingis, I thought it was going to be a bust, and that was very incorrect. I'm sure there are people right now screaming Luka. I'm not backing up. I'm not ready to back off that take yet. I view Luka in the same way that I viewed Carmelo Anthony over the course of his entire career, and that I have so far viewed Russell Westbrook over the course of their entire career. And that's going to piss some people off. But like, it's just a philosophical difference in like, how you judge how a player impacts winning a championship, And so like right now, like people always say that like the worst thing that a team can do is pay a guy, a faux superstar, a ton of money. Pay a guy who can't bring you a trophy a ton of money, and invest in that guy for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And to me, that's Luka Doncic. And you might be listening to this 5 years from now and being like, well, he's won 3 less championships. You're kind of stupid, Joe. And yeah, maybe I am. I mean, like, I've never claimed that my predictions are 100% correct. And I know I'm going to be wrong at some of them. But like, part of the reason why, like, I don't, even the Kristaps take, I don't regret is because like if you want to succeed in this industry, you have to be the most self-critical. I'm very self-confident. I am also incredibly self-critical, where like when I mess up, I'm not going to go out there and be like, guys, I'm gonna post this once a day for a year. I was wrong. I'm trying to acknowledge it very quietly and trying to move on with my life and damage control it. But like, I do learn from my mistakes. Like that is if you're not learning from your mistakes, what are you learning from? And so like that Kristaps thing, that's what got me into analytics, where like I assessed like I blew this really badly and I need to be better at this. And so like, that's, I don't regret anything that I was wrong on, because like, it makes me better.
I I think also like his archetype, statistically hasn't panned out well in the NBA. So I can kind of see where you were coming from there. Um, he's a unicorn, and,
Yeah,
and a unicorn is exactly that. It's rare.
I mean, that being said, I blew it. Like going into his analytical profile from Seville, I blew it.
Yeah.
Like knowing what I know now, I don't think I would have. I don't think I would have whiffed that bad. I probably would have whiffed to some degree, but I wouldn't have gone for the big air.
Got you. 60 seconds real quick on what makes Coach Tauer successful.
How are you giving me the hardest to answer question and telling me I have to answer in 60?
How does the psychology background impact his coaching?
I mean, I'm gonna be able to set up his background in 60 seconds. Jon Tauer was a Division III player who then went on to graduate school in psychology at Wisconsin, got a PhD in psychology, came back to coach at his alma mater, started off as an assistant, was now been the head coach for the last 7 years. Probably the biggest influence in my life as far as like how I view not only basketball, but like business, life, everything. Coach Tauer is a fascinating guy because he's brilliant psychologically, but like every single aptitude test he took as a kid came back that he should have gone into like what's it called? It's that thing that like every single finance kid wants to be out of college. Actuarial. Every single like thing that every single aptitude test he took said he should have gone to actuarial science. You can literally go up to this guy, and you can say, and I can't do this. You can go up and say it was 357 times 1,243. He thinks, and then he gives you the correct answer, and it's that fast. It literally like he is better at numbers than I am. He just doesn't use his time to search for analytics like I do. So that's why him and I work together. I'm sorry. What was now that I've set the table? What was the question about? Why is he successful?
I think just the psychology background is that how he communicates with players on the floor, how he understands what they're feeling without them saying. What goes into that.
And it's interesting. It's like, I mean, every single player who plays for Coach Tauer goes through 2 stages of him. When you come in, you're happy to be in such a winning program. St. Thomas, so he's a professor at St. Thomas. St. Thomas has made national news now because they got kicked out of their Division III conference and they're going Division I. So they've won so much. I think they've won like 12 of the last 14 championships. They've won national championships for D3. They're always in the tournament. When you first come into St. Thomas, you're happy to be part of a winning program, and Coach Tauer scares the crap out of you because you're an insecure 19-year-old and 20-year-old, and you're afraid. You've been able to skate by so far in life. You think I'm being slick, and then your coach is now able to, in theory, read you perfectly and know what you're thinking. And to be honest with you, I don't know. I play poker with Coach Tauer, and like he's very good at making reads. There's no way that he's not. But like he's never told me exactly what 2 cards I have. He's told me generally what he thinks I have. He's normally correct. But like as you get older, you realize that Coach Tauer is successful with psychological background because he's just very honest and indifferent. He just tells you the truth in very like not mean. Like he can tell you something that like other coaches might say in a mean way. It's like it's tough love, but Coach Tauer just tells you it's just like, hey, like we've got like, for example, I came into St. Thomas. I played 3 games at a different school in the conference. I actually led my team in scoring as a freshman against St. Thomas when we played them. I came into St. Thomas. I had a torn meniscus in my knee that I didn't even know about. And during tryouts, it was revealed that I had a tear in my meniscus. Before we knew it was a meniscus tear, though, I got the news on how he thought my tryout was. And he's like, dude, to be honest with you, if we didn't know you and we didn't have this relationship, you would have been cut. You were garbage. He didn't say garbage. That was how but like that's kind of how it works. Like he tells them it's like you didn't play well, and you think I was garbage. Like it's just is, but like you realize that like he didn't tell you that because he's trying to be a jerk. He's telling you that because he wants you to realize that like this is where you stand. And so like being able, like I think another thing that makes him so successful with the PhD background is that he's very precise in his language. It feels like that's one of the things that I believe that I've learned from him is that like he always takes that extra half a second when he has a thought to think about the recipient of the thought, to try to think about how am I going to frame this the best way so that like it might be something that this person would otherwise be opposed to or would reject in some way. But if I figure out the best way to communicate it, maybe this person might be able to accept it on a level he hasn't previously. I might not win him over in this moment, but I might start this like personal, thinking journey for this person that like leads us to the result we wanted to be led to. So I mean, and also he's a brilliant guy who's radically indifferent to other strategies. Like you watch his offense is constantly in the top, 5 percentile in synergy for college offenses. And it's simple. It's simple because it works. And, he's not one of those guys like Coach Roy Williams who like has to have a Rube Goldberg machine to get a layup. If you can run the same pick and roll action and you get a 1.1 points per possession read out of it every single time, well, thank you. We'll take the 1.1 possessions on every single 1.1 points on every single possession, in the game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that to me, I'm sure, that other people say other things, but like that to me, like the high intelligence, the radical indifference where it's just all about the results, and then also the honesty. I mean, those three things really add up to a great coach, I think.
Offensively speaking, you just kind of touched on that. Is his basically just pick and roll layups and then corner threes. It's the statistic guy's not favorite.
I can't take credit for almost anything, but like I like to think that I had something to do with the corner threes because that has been one of my big talking points with Coach Tauer over the last 2 to 3, and at first when he was like, hey, what about this relationship of us working together? I mean, it's also very interesting to break down our relationship, and it kind of speaks to like how he's able to get through to people. I mean, how many players do you hear about who transfer in late to a college, don't play in a game for that team, leave the program, transfer to another school to finish up, and then still maintain a positive relationship with the head coach? Never mind a working relationship, just like a friend relationship. So I mean, like, that to me, like that is my involvement with the program, to me, is kind of indicative of like how he operates. He finds edges and he's able to get things out of people that other coaches wouldn't. He's able to identify value in ways that, like, the idea that any other college coach would go to a former player who's 23, 24 years old and be like, I think you can help us, when he wasn't even able to help the team on the floor. That's a pretty wild premise. And it's worked out, but like it was worked out because he's indifferent. He saw someone who added value to him. The fact that I bombed out of the program and that I couldn't defend anyone to save my life in college, it didn't mean anything. It was just like, do you add value?
I think something that I see about coaches too, sometimes we sort people in. We see Joseph Gill comes in open gym and he misses 5 backdoor layups, and then I immediately think he's trash. I don't look at the fact that he missed those layups because of a great defender, and then he hit free.
Funny, you were actually explaining what happened to me last week. I went from a guy who was like very confident in his basketball abilities. I mean, the year that I was in the program, and the year that I before I ripped at my knee for the last time in fall workouts, I literally did not know where the ball was going when I shot it sometimes. Like my knee was just in such bad shape that like I would just miss layups, and like it wouldn't even be because of defense. I couldn't jump. So
I still think it's hilarious. I mean, it's not hilarious because you messed up your knee, but it is funny.
It's funny. We can acknowledge it's kind of funny. Like it's fine. Things are going okay. Like I don't have to hold the torch for my D3 career anymore.
My favorite part of it is that you're an offensive player that injured your knee on that defensive play.
That's why thank you. I mean, like that's part. Honestly, dude, and this, if it wasn't Tyus Jones who threw that pass, I would have never jumped for it. I wanted a Tyus pass, man. Like if that could have been the state finals, and if it was Billy from Armstrong, I don't care. I'll wall up when the ball's on when the guy catches the ball. I don't care about swatting it.
I mean, you can tell your grandkids that you swatted that pass out, not on your watch. Two last questions. What is Minneapolis like right now?
I mean,
outspoken about what it was like at the beginning, when George Floyd first, passed away and was killed, what has it been like?
It's strange. It feels like a population of people who are, first of all, being oppressed. I'm not part of that population. I'm talking about minorities, obviously.
Yeah.
It's very clear that, the amount of faith that people who look like me from the suburbs extended to the PDs of the Twin Cities was probably misguided. And, I, in particular, am very upset because I think about Philando Castile, who was a black man who was killed by police in St. Paul, I believe in 2015 or 16. And there were a lot of promises made at that time. And that officer was acquitted. And knowing what we know now about the circumstances of George Floyd's death and the way that the only reason this came to light and the truth came to light of how this happened is because a woman in the scene took the video of it, the 9-minute strangulation of George Floyd. It calls into question literally every action, every single person killed by this PD in the last 20 years. It calls into question everything we were told about Philando Castile. It calls into question all the promises that were made about these PDs being, being reformed in the wake of Philando Castile. And then now, we're starting to call into question, exactly how many people actually meant what they said about, the city council with Mayor Fry. Did you actually mean what you said when we were, out there in the streets and really making life not fun for people? Maybe not fun. That's the wrong language. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I can't explain to people how much support there was for the cause in Minneapolis. I think I saw a poll after the precinct was burnt that like 62% of residents of Minneapolis, and I was one of them, could find no fault of the people who burnt that precinct, because that precinct in particular was a precinct that, first of all, killed George Floyd, and second of all, was a precinct that all the cops who didn't play by the rules and didn't follow regulations that other precincts were sent to, the cowboy cops, if you will. The cops who got results, who didn't play by the rules, were sent to that precinct. And it really calls into question exactly how this PD was policing North Minneapolis, South Minneapolis, and minority populations. And, it's that thing where, and I can't help, and I marched and I went to the protests, and I went to Cup Foods where George Floyd was killed. And, this isn't about me, obviously. It could not be less about me, but standing at that spot, you cannot help but question everything that you did your entire life, especially considering that Philando Castile was killed, and I did nothing. I truly didn't. I did not do anything. I did not speak out. I put my faith in the system. I put my faith in the process, which is what you're told as a white person you're supposed to do. And I feel I was overcome with a sense of guilt, of sadness, of complacency. And I definitely do not shy away from trying to use my platform. The way that I view it is that, if I'm giving out free analytics game, you get to hear what I think about the world, because this information is worth something. If you don't, you can unfollow. It's fine. Yeah. This information is worth some small amount. I'm not selling it, so it's not worth a lot, but it's worth something. And, I definitely would feel like that if I wasn't using my small platform at this time to try to help the people in the basketball space who are part of these communities as marginalized people, that I wouldn't be able to look them in the eye next time I saw them, because these people have been telling us our entire lives that they are suffering and that they are marginalized and they are oppressed. And we, especially in this city of Minneapolis, it feels like a lot of people have been taking the convenient route where we just didn't believe them. And George Floyd and countless other people are dead because of it. And the mood in the city it still hangs over. And I'm not sure, it would take some actual, and the way that the Minneapolis PD handled the wake of the killing is disgusting. Bob Kroll, who is a name that I don't think people even know outside of the Twin Cities, is a disgusting human being. He's the union chief of the PD. He was trying to reinstate the officers to the force while they were awaiting criminal charges. And it seems like that this PD, especially the one in Minneapolis, and I've had nothing but bad experiences with the Minneapolis Police Department. I've had literally nothing but good experiences with the police department in the town I grew up in. Maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe it's not that I get treated differently potentially where I grew up. But this PD just needs to be abolished. This PD has been trying to be reformed. They've been trying to reform this police department for decades, and nothing changes. And people are just sick of it. It's time for action.
Yeah, I feel like there's a big difference between, supporting, the people that are supposed to serve and protect. That's something you can do, but you also have to, hold accountable to bad eggs that exist. And I mean, it kind of sounds like Minneapolis PD was the last chance for some of those cops.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I won't say, and this is where I kind of, I differentiate a little bit from people of like-minded political philosophy. But I don't believe that inherently every single police officer is a bad person. Mm-hmm. But at a certain point, if you have 1,000 officers in a police department and 40 of them are bad eggs and 960 of them are good eggs, but the 960 allow the 40 to act with impunity, You've got 1,000, practically speaking, bad eggs, and they're controlled by the 40 bad eggs. And I mean, like, it was also particularly disgusting to me that part of, because Derek Chauvin kills George Floyd over 9 minutes as George Floyd begs for his life, tells him he can't breathe, as passerbyers tell him that he's killing him. Derek Chauvin performs a continuous 9-minute act of killing, and one of the 3 officers who stood by and did nothing was on his 4th day. And his legal representation tried to use that to say that he was less blameless. He was more blameless in the killing because it was his 4th day. And to me, that just says that there is a culture of fear and intimidation with the thin blue line in this police department, where even when the ethics training is fresh in your head, whatever that might entail in the academy, that person didn't feel like he had the power to step in. What is the point of this police department? Because it is basically implying that this is an unreformable system where young cops come in, they are bossed around by the bad eggs, the Derek Chauvins, people are out here killing the George Floyds, and they feel they're either complicit or they feel powerless. And if these good cops, in whatever number they are, want to feel empowered, it's time to start breaking the thin blue line. Because you look at the hundreds of videos of police brutality across this country in the wake of the George Floyd incident, and there are precious few cops who are actually trying to reel in the ones who are assaulting protesters, who are just beating the crap out of kids. Are you a good cop if you allow that to happen?
Yeah, I feel that. Appreciate those words. We'll do.
I appreciate you asking. I truly do.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that's important to talk about. It's important to use the privilege that we do have. Let's talk about towing the line between being blunt honesty on Twitter and not sabotaging potential future customers.
I mean, I think it's a tightrope walk, and I am effectively scooting on the tightrope on my groin because I don't do a good job at doing either as well as I could. I feel like,
yeah.
I mean, it's and we could talk about this for a while, and this is a long podcast, so I won't, because you've got stuff to do and I've got stuff to do. But I definitely don't ever tweet anything I don't believe. I always tweet what I believe, and I also understand that sometimes I get asked to tweet things out that I won't tweet out. And it's just like my voice is only my voice, and that also so that kind of extends, like, when I'm right, I have to own it. When I'm wrong, I have to own it and I improve from it. I don't want my path in this industry to be dictated by the pressures of other people who may not even be real pressures or real players, because there's a lot of people who pretend like that they're able to inflict all this pressure on the arc of your career. And let me tell you, I've upset a lot of those people, and I have not felt a lot of repercussions yet. So maybe it's coming. I don't know. Maybe I'm just pop my head up and maybe a whack. So who knows? But yeah, I generally I've worked for agencies, and I've criticized their players after I've worked for them, and I don't do it because I'm mean. I don't do it because I'm a jerk. I do it because I think that it's important that you can be mindful of your closest relationships, but just because an agency's paid me for 2-3 packets of work over a 2-month period, is that paying my rent? Well, if it isn't, and it does to some degree, but if it isn't, I gotta start looking for my next rent check, and I gotta start looking for my next day trading disaster. And so I try to toe the line, and don't get me wrong, like the only time I ever really delete tweets are in a situation where either I use language that I'm ashamed of, and I'm trying to be a better person. I'm trying to grow as a person, and part of that I think is acknowledging that you screwed up, but part of that is also trying to remove the sense of comfort for the people who still want to use that language. So I think when when you're really looking at like using ableist language or using stuff that can be like construed as dog whistle racism, deleting it is the best call. Doesn't matter how young you were, how long ago it was. I try to delete as many idiotic remnants of the stupid person I was. I delete tweets that I don't think are indicative of who I am anymore, or who I strive to be. But I also delete tweets that are negative before I meet with the player, and that to me is just kind of common courtesy. because I also understand like a lot of these guys do read every single thing that is said about them, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Like I played 3 games of Division III basketball. I googled my name after every single one. Like, I mean, like you're telling me that we have the most crazy information superhighway in the history of mankind, and we're not using it to try to figure out how people feel about us. Like,
Yeah.
Players are they're people, man. But so in every once in a while, like even after I do that, like that it's not. I've never had somebody explicitly say you said this, but it's been acknowledged that I have been less than positive at times with the person I'm currently now trying to woo as a client. And frankly, it's always good because I find out in that moment if we're gonna have a relationship or not. Because if you can't handle like I tell people this all the time, I've literally verbatim said to players stuff I've tweeted about them. Like, and and I don't do it, like if I'm working on a project, I'm not going out and I'm not spilling the beans on Twitter. But I have ripped verbatim something that I said about players 6 months ago when their agent hires me to help them out with their game. There's not a single tweet that, even for someone that I've crushed, like RJ Barrett. If RJ Barrett pulled up my tweets about him and really wanted to try to make me uncomfortable, I would just be like, dude, I still believe that. I maybe I've tweaked my opinion since, but I don't think I was wrong at the time. And frankly, like how you feel about it, because this is my analysis,
Yeah.
So I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure I've lost out on potential clients. I have heard that I have a certain person who is a high profile player who's a fan.
Mhm.
I've been a little bit more, steering away from criticizing them and their friends since I figured that out. But for most part, you gotta be really a big time player for me to like give you a leeway. I feel like, I mean, like it's just, what am I if not honest? That's not saying that I have a whole bunch of big time players that constantly like look at my Twitter. It's just, who am I if not honest? Is this my analysis or is this the market's analysis?
Got you. Question: What's next for Merc Analytic? I mean, I heard you were putting a speaker set together. Where do you want the company to go?
So I mean, Merc, frankly, I mean, I love where Merc is at because like Merc is what I love doing, and so like it's that thing, like I'm a one man operation. I like it that way. I feel like I've got full creative control. I've got full quality control, which is very important to me.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as where Merc goes, I mean, like just expanding, more clients every single month, hopefully, and then eventually I make enough money where I buy a house in Montana and I delete my Twitter. Like that's like
The Phil Jackson dream.
Oh, seriously, like that. I was literally, I'm looking at my Phil Jackson book right now, and I looked, and he was like talking about like building a house on Flathead Lake, and I was like, what? Like that's where I want to live. Like what? Wait, and it's very, anyway, but it's weird, but like it's honestly the truth. Where like at a certain point, I mean, like I like the space I'm in. I love what I do. I want to grow, but like this isn't the ends. This is a mean to an ends for me. But as far as other stuff on the horizon, I'm working with a startup down in Texas called ePlay. I'm developing lectures for them. I'm doing a little bit of work for them for some agency work, a little bit of work for some boutique pro players that have, I'm doing a little bit of college work. There actually might be an opportunity for college coaches to hop on and be involved at no risk to them for the 2020-2021 season. But I mean, yeah, it's that thing where like it's nice to be in the space because like I can't tell you how many times someone's coming to me with an idea where it's like, what if I hired you for this? And I'm like, why aren't I doing that? So as far as what's next, I truly won't know until someone pitches me in a good idea. And nice thing about analytics and nice thing about like trying to be someone in the space that like you have full leeway to be creative and like so if somebody comes to me with a good idea and it makes sense, I'm all for it. It might not be an idea is within the the hourly price range that I'm currently working at, so I might pass on it while still supporting the idea and wishing it well. But
yeah, Is there a niche that you've dabbled in recently that you could see yourself doing more of?
I mean, in theory, like literally everything I do is kind of a niche in this independent marketplace. Like, yeah, all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's that thing where like I've never. I mean, there've been a few aspects of projects that were made to specification that was kind of like, if this leaks, I hope I'm not judged by this as a quality of my overall indicative level of work. But like, I generally feel like I hit a nice sweet spot of being like very analytically like actionable and practical and like, clean, if you will. Like I don't use the noisiest numbers in the world, also still getting important points across. Cause like, if you think about where I make my edge, it's from making a player from a guy who scores 9 points every 10 possessions to 10 points every 10 possessions. If that takes 2 years, and I'm a guy who raises a PPP by 0.05, 1 point per every single 20 possessions over 1 year sample size for 2 years, over a 1 year length of time for 2 years. So like, it's all about grinding out the small edges and like really communicating it effectively. And there's a lot of nice niches where that's available. And like honestly, I'm very upset about how Corona is being handled in this country. But personally, Corona has been it's brought new people into the fold that otherwise I don't think would have taken longer to be brought into the fold, because a lot of people are taking the time to assess, their process in this space, be it skill trainer, team, college team, professional team, even a league, an agency, a money man, a handler, if you will. I mean, whatever term you want to use for those people.
Yeah.
They're assessing their process right now. They're trying to fill in the blanks that they're not strong at. And, next thing with analytics is that like, there's a lot of adaptability in that. So, whatever the project comes, it comes. And I accept the challenge. I love work. And I was up till 5 a.m. last night on a 12-hour day. I loved it. So, I like all my niches.
Yeah. Last question. Sorry, I just thought of another one. What's the turnaround for, if I want to hire you to, I'm an NBA player that's in the bubble now, and
okay. So I think, because we had a conversation about a client I just delivered some work for before, and I think you're getting at that, right?
No.
Oh no. Okay. So I thought. Yeah. So it depends on what you're asking. I mean, I've worked on literally 5-hour turnarounds before for some smaller stuff, and that was more of a niche skill set thing. That was the player's own idea. He went to his trainer and his agent was like, I want to work on this, and they reached out to me. As far as my turnarounds, I delivered a report on an entire – this is for a WNBA player. So I delivered a report for her entire new batch of teammates. It was a 40-page report, and that was a 5-day turnaround. And I mean, like, it's funny. 5 days seems like a long time when you're assessing – it was literally 40 pages. Like it was.
Was that mainly film work, or that was mainly statistical work that you saw in her teammates?
I mean, it's got to be actionable. It's got to be practical. So I mean, it's all statistically based, but at the same time, I mean, like, telling this player, like this player on your team that you're coming into, she is a great on-ball pick and roll player. This is a number for PPP. That's a nice like grounding, anchoring topic.
Yeah.
But like, it's not actionable. Like what where does that player mix in? So like if I say like this player is, and this is just like, off the dome, like a very small thing that you could potentially point out to players is like this player over the course of her entire WNBA career has always rated in the top 1/3 of the percentage of her passes out of pick and roll to go to spot up players. And so when this player is in pick and roll and you see a potentially, like 50-50 opportunity to relocate into the corner, you should probably do it more often than not, or more often than you otherwise would, because this player is more likely to hit you. So, that right there is a small nugget. And, basically 40 pages of small nuggets add up into a lot of time. And I was putting in like, I think like 16-hour days to turn that around in 5 hours. So you got to watch a lot of film to do this well, I think. So, I watched literally every single possession of all of our new teammates over the course of their most recent season. So, that right there is a big chunk of it. And then you have to write the 40 pages. So,
yeah.
For an average player, I normally can get about 24 to 36 hour turnaround for a one-off a player. As far as like, this is what I see, this is where I can add. And the best part about my work is that like, for if you're a player who's a serious professional candidate or already a pro, the first sample is always free.
Okay, gotcha. All right, man. We tell them your Twitter handle. If you have a hot NBA bubble take.
Oh, I mean, if I don't, right now I will in an hour. It's Joseph Gill, MA.
Say again?
Joseph Gill, MA.
Gotcha. Appreciate you coming on, man. Have a great day.
I mean, hopefully this will be 2 parts. This was, as always, a long podcast. I can't talk short. I just can't. So thank you, man. Good seeing you, buddy.
Appreciate you, man.